Every 40 seconds, an American child goes missing. Every year, 840,000 children go missing in the United States, with some forced into trafficking. While many missing children are located within 24 hours, others are never found. Primetime television offers an ideal medium to present cases of children gone missing to the widest available audience. Kidnapping and human trafficking are federal offenses, so a program like A Place Called Home would be an asset for federal law enforcement agencies to notify a national audience about children who have gone missing. A Place Called Home will present missing child cases in both a documentary and docudrama format. The program reports on the brass tacks of the investigation by presenting reenactments of abductions and interviews with law enforcement authorities. To examine the pathos of the cases, interviews with parents and other relations will explore the emotional impact such crimes make on families. Missing children need our help, and A Place Called Home is the ultimate Amber Alert. As the producer and host of A Place Called Home, I am raising funds to finance the pilot. In order to present this work in its best possible light, we need production value. In other words, I can't just shoot it with a smartphone. The goal of my production company, Leader One Studios, is to raise $10,000 for the budget, so that networks will see it as a serious work and will be convinced that we are serious about finding missing children. Please donate to the show's Patreon fund at www.patreon.com/leader1. See the link below. Any amount will be appreciated, and you will save lives. Child victims of kidnapping and human trafficking await our efforts to broadcast their plight on a national stage. A Place Called Home, bringing the quest to find missing children to primetime television. Thank you in advance for your support. Welcome to Human Monsters. From the early 1980s to the early 1990s, a witch hunt was underway, spearheaded by the most zealous of evangelical Christians, to erase the nefarious influence of Satan and Satanists from American society. In so doing, groundless allegations of the ritual sacrifices and sexual abuse of children made headlines and gave rise to widespread paranoia. The FBI investigated the allegations and found them to be groundless. Nevertheless, many people's lives and reputations were ruined due to misunderstandings and anti-Satanist propaganda. The McMartin case out of Manhattan Beach, California, involves a daycare center that was accused of the ritual abuse of children, despite the lack of evidence. The proprietors of the McMartin preschool would become embroiled in a legal case that would last many years, with hundreds of charges, yet return no convictions. This is the story of how the McMartin family and other child care workers were presumed guilty until proven innocent. The McMartin Preschool was founded in 1956 by Virginia McMartin and would go on to open a second location in 1966. The first location was closed in the 1980s when Virginia was no longer able to run it as her health declined. She received many civic awards due to the high standards at which the schools operated. Her daughter, Peggy McMartin, was the chief administrator of the preschool due to Virginia's disability and failing health. Virginia's grandson, Ray Bucky, also worked at the preschool. Single mother Judy Johnson had her son Mitchell enrolled at the McMartin preschool. One day after she brought him home, she noticed he fidgeted and shifted from side to side in his seat due to discomfort. It had nothing to do with the chair he was sitting in. The pain appeared to have its origin on his body. At one point, he complained to Judy of pain in his buttocks. Judy examined him and saw that his anus was red. Typically, Mitchell attended classes at the McMartin School on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 a.m. until noon. Judy had a practice of documenting his illnesses on her calendar. She noticed that the redness around Mitchell's anus persisted. She also noted in her calendar that he suffered from other symptoms of illness at this time, including diarrhea, a condition that can result in a red and sore anus from frequent wiping. July 18, 1983. Judy went in for an appointment with her doctor. She had contracted vaginitis. She took Mitchell with her to the appointment. Mitchell wasn't left out in the playroom to read highlights for children. Judy brought him in with her to see the doctor. The bane of many a doctor's existence is the patient who thinks they can diagnose themselves. Even before WebMD, this was common. Judy's lack of a medical degree did not dissuade her from making her own assumptions in her attempt to be her own gynecologist and Mitchell's pediatrician. She said to Dr. Mark Siegel, "Mitchell's anus has been itchy. I think I might have given him my vaginitis." What a joke. The doctor's sentiments echoed this almost word for word as part of his internal monologue. He shook his head with a smile on his face and said, "No, that's not possible. He can't have vaginitis. He probably has some form of eczema." He had a point. Mitchell didn't have a vagina. During a visit from his uncle, Mitchell Johnson refused to sit on his lap, which was unexpected given the close bond they once shared. Mitchell backed away at the invitation as if his Uncle Steve's lap were covered in hydrochloric acid. This wasn't the only disturbing behavior observed in the boy. When Steve walked out of the shower, Mitchell came running into the bathroom and punched Stephen in the groin. Mitchell began to yell and scream at him in a rage. Having purged this anger from his system temporarily, he ran away. The next day, Steve plugged in a hairdryer in the living room, and it was enough to cause Mitchell to jump back and scream. He ran to his bedroom and hid under the bed. He refused to come out until Judy reassured him that there was no threat to behold. Later that night, Judy discussed Mitchell's strange behavior with Steve and his wife, Debbie. Judy said, "I don't know what it is. He's been acting so strange lately." Steve said, "Do you think it's because Brad moved out?" Brad was Mitchell's father. Brad and Judy separated by that time. Judy said, "Maybe. I'm not sure, but I've noticed redness on his bottom. I've seen it a few times." Debbie said, "Redness? What kind of redness?" "Around his anus. It started earlier in the summer, and now it's happening again." Steve said, "What do you think it is?" Judy could only shake her head. Debbie didn't think it was anything to be alarmed about. She said, "Maybe he did something with a toy. You know how kids experiment. He could have done something like that, right?" Judy turned away from her, as if to say that she was so unprepared to face this possibility that by physically reversing her stance, she could put it behind her. Steve said, "Maybe you should take him to the doctor." Judy responded with a shrug, reluctant to admit she'd already taken him to a doctor with no remedy in sight. Brad brought Mitchell and his older brother Mark out for his visitation. He took them out to a restaurant and then to his apartment. Brad examined Mitchell's buttocks at the apartment and scrutinized the redness around his anus. Mitchell was still incontinent. Brad applied zinc oxide to Mitchell's anus. He returned the boys to Judy's home at 8:30 p.m. Hours earlier, Judy noticed the redness on Mitchell's buttocks, the fourth time since late June. Now she was certain as to the cause of the red coloration. He had been raped. She opened up her day planner to August 11th. She took a pencil and drew a thick, dark square around the number 11 and then shaded in the box, as if by doing so she could leave it impenetrable to uncertainty. Judy's next move was to consult with a minister to get his advice on how to handle the matter. He advised her to move forward with efforts to prosecute the party she believed was preying on her son. She documented her feelings on the matter as follows. With a police examination, could it additionally damage him? The priest discussed social commitment, something previously copying and opening in my mind. I sat on the yard after he left, watching Mitchell leap off a little block garden wall. How should a man's grown-up penis enter such a heavenly messenger? There were heaps of holy messengers still at that school. I started to feel my blood bubble. This psycho should be halted. I called Detective Hogue. I will take my youngster to the police. She was to go with me to the general hospital. August 12, 1983. Manhattan Beach Police Detective Jane Hogue received a call from Judy Johnson. She was the authority in her department on child sexual abuse cases. The exchange between Hogue and Johnson went as follows. This is Hogue. Johnson. Investigator Hogue, this is Judy. Judy Johnson. What's happening, Judy? I want to record a molestation, child abuse. My child just let me know that he was attacked by Ray Bucky, his educator at the McMartin preschool. Hogue, I think that you should take him to the pediatric emergency department at Harbor General. Go right away. I've already planned to have him examined at Kaiser by Dr. Scott McGeary. Judy, I implore you, take him to Harbor. They're awesome. I can call at the present time and organize a test at the Marion Davies Clinic. This wasn't good enough for Judy. Hogue, it's your call. However, I really want you to come down to the station. We need to start up an investigation. Judy went to the station that day at 4:15 p.m., whereupon they had a conference in a private room. With Hogue documenting her every statement, Judy told her about the redness on Mitchell's anus, saying, "Half a month ago, I examined it with my in-laws. Not one of us could figure it out. Then, yesterday, I went to pick him up at the school. He stayed late, until 4 o'clock. When I arrived, Ray was the main worker there. They left him with the kids. Beam strolled Mitchell out, and he told me he's an extremely nice, supportive kid. Later, when I was giving Mitchell his bath, I saw it again." Hogue, so why do you think it was Ray who did it? Today I asked Mitchell, did Ray at any point put his penis in your rear end? He said, No, Mommy, Beam takes my temperature. Then I asked, do you play doctor at school, Mitchell? But he said again, Beam takes my temperature. Then a couple of hours after the fact, I conversed with Mark, my older kid, and he said that Mitchell told him, Beam hurt me. Occasionally the young men shower together, so I asked Mark, did you at any point put your penis close to your younger sibling's rear end? Mark said, no, totally not. Judy said Ray behaved inappropriately toward the children at the school. She said, he allows those children to slither all over him. I want to put a stop to it. Hoag asked Judy to bring Mitchell in for an interview 5 days later. She said, "Don't have him examined by anybody else, including Sergeant Samuel." Involving Sergeant Brian Samuel would have been a conflict of interest, since he was acquainted with the McMartin family and even had his child enrolled in their school. Detective Hoag later received a call from Dr. Scott McGeary of the Kaiser Hospital. He says, "I just inspected Mitchell Johnson and he seemed charming. He went around the room having a great time. His vitals are all typical: eyes, ears, nose, and throat. His mom said there's blood around his anus and that she thinks he was sodomized. She wouldn't tell me who did it, just that it was one of the staff at his preschool." Hoag said, "What's your diagnosis?" "Indeed, I analyzed his anus. It's inflamed and puckered. There's most certainly redness around the rectal cavity, which is disturbing. He might have been sodomized or violated by an object. So, I'm setting up a report of sexual abuse." In her report, Hoag designated Dr. McGeary's findings as inconclusive. She also cited him not being a specialist in sodomy as being a disqualifying factor as a medical professional making a pronouncement about a potential sexual abuse victim. As usual, the people who never sweated their way through medical school had all the answers. August 16th. Judy showed up at the station with Mark and Mitchell in tow. Judy's opening remarks consisted of informing Detective Hoag that Mitchell had diarrhea. She said she was certain he didn't have looseness of the bowels on the 11th of August. Hoag had a private tete-a-tete with Mitchell, whispering back and forth with him to get his version of the truth. He told her he had his temperature taken anally. He also said she'd seen Ray's and Mark's penises. Hoag noted that at this time, in the exchange, Mitchell became anxious and unfocused. Hoag said to him, "What Ray'd used to take your temperature, Mitchell?" Mitchell could not bring himself to address that issue at this time. Instead, he shouted, "I showered with Mark." She noticed he was more uneasy in Judy's presence, which was why she wanted to interview him alone in another room. Judy watched from a two-way mirror. There was no audio feed to the room from which she was observing. Hoag gave Judy the signal to re-enter the room. Once Judy was back at Mitchell's side, he told Hoag that Ray took a photo of him while he was naked. Judy filled Hoag in on the other details. "Mitchell let me know that Ray pulled him from his bunk and brought him into the washroom. He put a hairdryer on his head. He said Ray turned him over and jabbed him in the rear end." It suited Judy to be in charge of the questioning on Mitchell's behalf. She wanted to make sure all the details were given in full and according to her stringent specifications. Apparently, only she could be counted on to accomplish this. Detective Hoag requested a one-on-one with Mark in private. He conceded that he showered with Mitchell occasionally. He said that Mitchell had touched his genitals. He said nothing sexual ever transpired between them. Hoag recalled that their parents were separated. She said, "When did you last see your dad, Mark?" "Last Thursday. Thursday night we went to his place for pizza." "Last Thursday night. What time?" "I don't know. I think he got us around 7. We got Straw Hat Pizza and took it to his place." "What time did you get home?" "Around 8:30. I'm not sure." "Was there any time while at your father's place that Mitchell was alone with your father?" "No, Mitchell was with me the whole time." The Johnsons left the station around 5 p.m. 20 minutes later, Judy called Hoag and said, "Mitchell just let me know that Ray made 2 different kids cry. He said Holly and Matthew, yet he doesn't know their last names." Hoag arranged with Judy's blessing to have Mitchell examined by another doctor. this time a physician who specialized in pediatric rape. August 17th. Mitchell was taken to UCLA's Harbor's Marion Davies Clinic. He was examined by Dr. Gene Simpson and Dr. Linda Golden, both premier authorities on pediatric abuse. They were members of the child abuse team. Dr. Simpson diagnosed Mitchell Johnson's anal cavity as being, quote, very remiss and, quote, expanded open. Other findings: redness, abrasions, broken skin, and yellowish earthy colored wounds, the latter being observed at the lower edge of the rectum. Dr. Simpson told Detective Hogue she believed he'd been sodomized. She did, however, opine that hard stools or diarrhea could have led to his anus becoming inflamed. Detective Hogue concluded that Raymond Buckey was the only possible suspect in the assault. She wrote that he, quote, had caused injury, bound and choked his casualty, and sodomized him while on the premises of the McMartin School in Manhattan Beach. Hogue called Judy and notified her about what she had logged in her report. The next day, Judy stormed into the station with more information for Hogue. She said, Mitchell said Ray took naked pictures of him, Holly, and Matthew. He said he was tied up. Ray used Mark's scout rope. She reported some of Mitchell's recent behaviors, which were atypical, according to her. She said, an evening or two ago, he had a nightmare. I found him squatted on his bed, face down with his butt stood up in the air. He was crying and saying, get away, like he was being chased by some kind of monster. He said that Ray was putting a hairdryer on his head. She said he reacted to every noise with which he was familiar with alarm. She also reported a decline in his appetite. He did not want her to carry him. He had red marks on other areas of his body. There were rashes on his inner legs. Rashes appeared around his mouth. He still had a red anus. His face was swollen. He picked incessantly at his blanket. He reacted to men with fear. He would cling to her, but then run away and hide for long periods. He was apprehensive with strangers, all strangers. He slept restlessly. He was prone to tantrums. He was now urologically incontinent. He could never sit still for long. He pushed with his feet. He sucked his thumb. He feared monsters in the dark. Judy reported this all with desperation and haste, as if she faced a deadline that posed a threat of some kind. Thus far, Detective Hogue hadn't mentioned anything about the statute of limitations. Yet, Judy acted as if there wasn't a nanosecond to waste. Hogue said, Judy, I realize you're vexed. However, you can't report these findings to anyone else. Judy said, please accept my apologies. However, I've already spoken to a couple of people. Who? Who did you talk to? I talked to Ron and Cheryl Crass. They live around the bend from me. Their child, Kevin, he's 3 years of age. He was in Ray's group too. Goodness, no, Judy. You shouldn't have spoken to them. You shouldn't have discussed this with anyone. I know, but listen. Their child was in Ray's group, and they began seeing issues with him at the same time I began seeing problems with Mitchell. Cheryl might know different families who had children in Ray's group. You really should talk to her. Detective Hogue did meet with Cheryl Crass. Cheryl said, I spoke to Kevin. He said nothing happened to him, just that he could have done without going to McMartin. Did he say why? No. He recently began crying once they put him in Ray's group, so I removed him from the preschool. Well, thank you for your assistance. In any case, if it's not too much trouble, ensure you keep this private. You can't talk about this with anyone. Cheryl responded with silence. Mrs. Crass? Do you understand that you can't discuss this with anyone? I did talk to somebody. I didn't know I couldn't. Who have you spoken to? Well, my husband talked to Neil Stedman about it. The Stedmans have 2 kids that go to McMartin, a boy and a girl. She then related that she had learned all the details of the Johnson case. Detective John Dye met with some children who had been placed in Ray Bucky's care at the McMartin school. Their families heard about the Johnson allegations and were concerned about the possibility that a threat hung over their own children. Days later, somebody told Peggy about the allegations, and she called the police. She spoke with Detective Dye. She said, "This is crazy. Why didn't you come to me first?" "I can't talk about this with you, ma'am. It's private." "Private? How can it be private if you've already discussed it with about 6 people?" "I can't discuss the case. I'm sorry. Will you let me know who the whining kid is?" Dye stonewalled her. A few days later, Peggy spoke with Detective Hogue. She said, "The way you're handling this is truly absurd. Are you going to force me to call each parent to figure out who documented the complaint? Please accept my apologies, Mrs. Bucky. However, the case is secret and no data can be released. You know, my mom is a long-lasting companion of Chief Kohlmeyer, and I can't imagine he endorses this. Do you know Ray's whereabouts? Beams away. He left 3 days prior with his sister. He's climbing in South Dakota. He left the state. He arranged it months ago. You can take a look at his flight plan. That won't be necessary. However, when he returns home, ensure he sticks around." September 2nd, a judge issued a capture warrant for Ray Bucky upon Detective Hogue's request. Police descended upon Virginia's house. They seized the McMartin school's records. Next, they moved on to Peggy and Ray's house and seized any materials they considered to be related to the case. From there, they went to the McMartin school. Their objective was to look for child pornography, something Detective Hogue assumed Raymond Bucky would have created, based on her research on pedophilia. After a 3-hour search, the police emerged with no incriminating items along this vein. What they did leave with was a 3-foot length of rope, an issue of Playboy magazine found underneath Ray's bed, and a pair of novelty fighter's shorts with a graphic of a banana emblazoned over the groin. They even took Virginia's personal diary. Ray was placed under arrest. He was placed in a holding cell. He was reportedly baffled that this had all transpired. He maintained that he never sexually abused Mitchell Johnson. Raymond's lawyer, Donald Kelly, has said that he arranged with Detective Hogue for Raymond to turn himself in. To quote Kelly, "Hogue's a liar. She reneged on our agreement. She knew precisely the exact thing she was doing. She needed to capture him openly, not too far off on the avenue. She needed to embarrass him. She's attempting to turn individuals against him. This is bullshit." One Captain Wenner notified Hogue about Kelly's grievance. She denied that any such arrangement was even proposed. Raymond's family posted $5,000 for his bail. Raymond was later released due to a lack of evidence. September 8th. The Manhattan PD expanded the investigation to involve several McMartin student families, with many of the children having graduated years ago. Some of these children attended the McMartin school before Raymond began working there. The police drafted a form letter to send to hundreds of parents to find out if anything untoward happened to their children during their time at the McMartin school. This is the text of that letter. September 8th, 1983. Dear parent, Police Department, City of Manhattan Beach, 420 15th Street, Manhattan Beach, California, 22252. This division is directing a criminal examination, including youngster attack. Beam Bucky, a worker of Virginia McMartin's preschool, was captured September 7, 1983, by this department. The accompanying method is clearly a disagreeable one. However, to safeguard the freedoms of your youngsters as well as the privileges of the charged, this request is fundamental to a total investigation. Records demonstrate that your kid has been, or alternately is right now, an understudy at the preschool. We are asking your help with this proceeding with examination. Please question your child to see if he or she has been a witness to any crime or if he or she has been a victim. Our examination shows that conceivable lawbreaker acts include oral sex, petting of privates, butt, cheek, or chest region, and homosexuality, perhaps dedicated under the affectation of taking the youngster's temperature. Also, photographs might have been taken of kids without their apparel. Any data from your youngster in regards to having at any point noticed Ray Bucky to abandon a study hall with a kid during any rest period, or on the other hand, in the event that they at any point noticed Ray Bucky tie up a kid, is important. Please total the encased data structure and return it to the department in the encased stamped return envelope straight away. We will get in touch with you in the event that conditions direct same. We request that you keep this examination stringently secret on the grounds that the idea of the charges and the profoundly close-to-home impact it would have on our local area. Kindly don't talk about the examination with anybody outside your close family. Try not to contact or examine the examination with Raymond Bucky, any individual from the charged litigant's family, or representatives associated with McMartin Preschool. There is no evidence to indicate that the management of Virginia McMartin's preschool had any knowledge of this situation, and no detrimental information concerning the operation of the school has been discovered during this investigation. Additionally, no other employee of the preschool is under investigation for any criminal act. Your brief regard for this and answer no later than September 16, 1983 will be appreciated. Harry L. Kohlmeyer, Jr., Chief of Police. John Wenner, Captain. It was the first day of the fall semester at the McMartin School. Grace Shelby was the mother of 4-year-old Jennifer, a McMartin alumnus who had been instructed by Ray Bucky. Grace received the form letter from the police that day and became hysterical after reading the content. She took the letter to her husband, Bill, and said, "Read this." "What is it?" "Read it." Bill's blood began to boil when he read this section about the allegations of sexual assault. Grace rushed to where Jennifer was playing with her Cabbage Patch Kid. Grace put the doll aside. She said, "Jenny, do you remember last year at the preschool, a while ago when you were in Mr. Ray's class?" "Yeah." "Did Mr. Ray do anything bad to you? Did he touch you anywhere on your body, like on your privates?" Jennifer responded by shaking her head. Grace said, "Never? Are you sure?" "No, never. I like Mr. Ray. He's nice." Grace returned to where Bill was sitting. He finished reading the letter and said, "This is staggering." Grace read the letter for a second time. She said, "I'm calling Peggy." She dialed the number and Peggy picked up. "Peggy, I got this letter from the police." Peggy said, "I know, all about it. I can't believe they sent a letter like that. It's horrible. Did Ray really get arrested?" "Yes, they got him last week, but they let him go. They had to. There's no proof. Nothing." "How can they send this letter if there is no proof?" "I don't know. They won't tell us which kid's reporting him. You ought to have seen how they treated our home and the preschool. They came in and flipped around everything. They tore everything apart." "But why? How could they do all of this on the off chance they have nothing? Peggy grew quiet, stewing over the implications. Grace said, "All things considered, we spoke to Jenny, and she said nothing happened, that Ray was nice to her. And that's what we're going to tell the police, all right? I believe you should know that." "I appreciate that. I can't tell you what this is doing to my mother." The mothers were still bringing their children to the McMartin school, albeit with some apprehension. Ray was not working there at the time, as he was advised by his attorney to avoid children for the time being. Raymond Bucky began work at the McMartin after a fruitless run of short-lived academic pursuits and dead-end jobs. He was not highly ambitious and was more often than not inclined to self-gratification and aimlessness. He had a criminal record, but it was for possession of marijuana. He began to pay closer attention to his family's preschool, and it occurred to him that it was an environment in which he might enjoy working. As he put it, "I took a gander at the preschool and saw the reason why my family was so engaged with it, and why they delighted in it to such an extent. It was an exceptionally blissful, elevating environment to be in." He started working there part-time, and he enjoyed the boisterous energy of the children. When you enjoy your job, you never work a day in your life. And so it was with Ray Bucky at the McMartin School. He elected to work there full-time. He was even given his own class. He was judged long before the child sexual abuse allegations because his choice of vocation was unconventional for a male. In other words, his masculinity was called into question. He didn't have a girlfriend or a wife, which also struck people as odd. Many assumed him to be homosexual and, due to the allegations, drawn especially to boys. As far as they were concerned, he had all the makings of a pedophile. Donald Kelly called up Detective Wenner and unloaded on him. "You all have truly messed this up. Besides the fact that you neglected to have provided me with a duplicate of the police report, you presently are attempting to turn the local area against my client by spreading lies. I shouldn't need to advise you that Ray Bucky has protected rights." Wenner said, "Peggy's the one calling in and out of town, bothering guardians for data." Kelly said, "That letter caused all the harm. That was way out of line." Kelly called Hoag's credibility into question, accusing her of lacking objectivity in the matter. He considered the case she was building against Ray Bucky to be without merit. He said it wasn't the first time Hoag approached charges of that nature with exploratory writing as a means to establish a bias against the accused. She had a sordid history of doing so. Of the hundreds of children who were asked by their parents if they were sexually assaulted at the McMartin school, not one of them reported anything of the sort. Nevertheless, many parents withdrew their children from the school. The allegations, thus far unproven, left a blemish on the school's reputation, one that stubbornly resisted erasure. Judy Johnson met with Detective Hoag to make another allegation. "There's another understudy, a young lady named Tamara Morgan. Mitchell saw her in the restroom. She was stripped. This occurred at the preschool before Ray. Judy was like a geyser with one story after another from month to month. The day after she reported what supposedly was perpetrated by Tamara Morgan, she called Hoag and said, 'Miss Betty was missing in July since her little girl passed on. That is when Mitchell went into Ray's group. That's when I began seeing his redness around his anus.' Judy began meeting with other McMartin parents to discuss the accusations. A 7-year-old boy named Austin was asked if anything untoward had happened to him at the McMartin school. He said he had not experienced any kind of abuse. His parents kept pressuring him, asking him more and more questions about whether or not Ray Bucky sexually abused him. Still, Austin clung to the stance of denial, shaking his head and offering no further responses. Even when he was brought to a psychiatrist to unearth answers, he may have been reluctant to divulge to his mother. He held steadfastly to his position that he had never been abused at the McMartin School by Ray Buckey. One Key McFarland had a residency at the Arizona Children's Association in Tucson. She did some advocacy in Washington, D.C. as a lobbyist for the National Organization for Women and had been an essayist for the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect. She moved to Los Angeles to co-write an article with one Dr. Roland Summit of UCLA Harbor Medical Center. He was positioned to distribute a piece about what was dubbed Youngster Sexual Abuse Accommodation Syndrome, which the U.S. Department of Justice defines as follows. The accommodation syndrome has 5 stages: secrecy, helplessness, entrapment, and accommodation, delayed and unconvincing disclosure of the abuse, and, finally, a retraction of the complaint in the face of the usual adult disbelief and blame of the victim. The syndrome occurs because of the factors surrounding the abuse itself, and because adults typically respond to child abuse victims' reports with disbelief, blame, and rejection. These reactions compound the trauma of the abuse itself and can drive the child deeper into self-blame, self-hate, alienation, and re-victimization. If unchallenged, the accommodation syndrome reinforces both the victimization and society's indifference to it. Clinicians have the power to interrupt the accommodation process and thereby not only to prevent the victim's emotional disability, but also to break the intergenerational cycle of child abuse. McFarland was recruited by Children's Institute International, or CII, where she worked with other professionals in this niche to develop techniques to pry information about incidents of sexual abuse from children who were suspected of having been victimized with or without evidence. Part of their methodology involved using anatomically correct dolls and videotaping interviews with children that often lasted up to 90 minutes and almost resembled police interrogations. The point was that one should never accept no as an answer, no matter how often it was repeated. To quote McFarland, historically, the process of obtaining a kid's revelation has been imperfect. It requires the casualty to retract their maltreatment on numerous occasions to different gatherings, to specialists, doctors, police examiners, and afterward to a jury. Each meeting, in progression, whether clinical or for other lawful purposes, empowers the child to retell a story that is startling and responsibility conjuring. It causes the child outrageous uneasiness, and it occurs again and again. Speaking of how a parent could benefit from the technique, McFarland said, "In the event that your child was manhandled at that school, they are stifling the recollections. They would rather not defy it. They would rather not remember it. They might try and be reminded of what could befall them on the off chance that they told, afraid of being known as a liar by their folks who aren't outfitted to manage the truth." Each of the parents of the McMartin students agreed to have their children interviewed at CII. November 1st, Manhattan Beach Community Church. Reverend John Calhoun received a call from a parishioner named Nancy Peters. His secretary told him she was, quote, unhinged, crazy. Nancy said to Calhoun, sobbing, "Reverend, I really want to see you." He said, "What's wrong?" "It's Michelle." Michelle was Nancy's 5-year-old daughter. Nancy said, "We just got back from the treatment clinic downtown. They let us know that Michelle was physically attacked, that terrible things happened to her back when she went to the McMartin preschool." During a 90-minute session of being grilled on camera, Michelle finally said that she was molested. To quote Nancy, "They showed me the video. I saw her say it. I saw her say that she was attacked. Also, when the specialist inspected her privates, they found scarring. She was mishandled terrible to the point that she has scars. Soon parents of the McMartin students began to assemble at Calhoun's church. To quote the Reverend, when the news came from CII, a great deal of the guardians were vexed in light of the fact that they accepted what they'd seen on the tapes and everything they'd been told by the specialists, that their kids had been molested. As the numbers increased, the word around the community was that perhaps youngsters had been attacked for years. He said none of them accepted the allegations as truth until they went to CII. The CII's pediatrician, Dr. Astrid Hagar, reported that over 90% of the children presented with genital scarring, consistent with a history of sexual abuse. Said Calhoun, so you had this situation that as individuals went to the organization, overall, most reached the conclusion that the story was true. 4-year-old Tina Wilkes was brought to the CII by her mother, Sharon. Initially, Sharon was resistant to the idea that Virginia and Peggy could have abused Tina, as she was on good terms with both women, and there were no indications that anything was amiss with Tina, mentally or physically. Eventually, Sharon got caught up in the hype. McFarland questioned Tina for an hour, and Tina steadfastly and resolutely denied that anything inappropriate happened to her at the McMartin school. She was shown male and female genitalia on 2 anatomically correct dolls and was asked if she had, quote, taken off her clothes at the school. McFarland asked Tina if she had ever participated in so-called naked games and if she had, quote, taken a picture of a naked horsey, as she put it. To this, Tina replied, "Are you crazy?" McFarland told Tina she had spoken with other children who attended the McMartin school in the same class as her, the class taught by Ray Buckey. Tina said, "I don't want to tell. Do you think something terrible will happen to you? Beam will put his nails in my back, his fingernails. No, he won't. You're never going to see him again." McFarland stressed the importance of disclosing what had been done to Tina at the McMartin school. Since then, Virginia and Peggy were accused of participating in and facilitating the abuse. McFarland pressed Tina for information about this. Tina denied that Virginia and Peggy were involved. Tina was asked if she had ever been taken anywhere in Ray's vehicle. She denied this, even after allegedly telling her mother it had happened. After Sharon came back in the room, Tina, after further interrogation, said that Ray and Peggy removed their clothes in front of the children. Tina was promised that she would never see the McMartins and their school again. November 30th. Judy Johnson called Jane Hogue for the 23rd time. She said Babette stepped on Mitchell's stomach. She made him puke. He described an old, chunky lady. She came to the school and held his feet down while he was sodomized. Judy told Hogue that Mitchell was forced to perform oral sex on Peggy. She said, Mitchell said they took him to a farm far away. That is where he rode naked on horses. She said it was at the farm where Mitchell saw Peggy in the nude. She said Mitchell also saw Ray take pills there. She had more. He killed a dog and dropped a cat in hot water. December 19th, the day of Judy Johnson's 24th call to Detective Hogue. Mitchell said Ray wore costumes while he attacked him. A cop, a firefighter, a comedian, and a cleric. He even dressed up as Santa Claus. He said Ray cut up bunnies and that Peggy put some kind of star in his bottom. Hoag didn't question this. She had heard stories over the years of children being forced into satanic rituals, which supposedly included animal sacrifices and rites involving sexual abuse. The star in question was the Baphomet, the official insignia of the Church of Satan. Reverend Calhoun hosted another meeting for the parents of the McMartin students. They were howling for blood and openly mused about launching physical attacks against the McMartin staff. They were also in talks to hire an attorney. The McMartins were encouraged by a friend to shut down the school. Even after their membership numbers dwindled, Virginia refused to shut the place down. Virginia began receiving threatening phone calls. They would go something like this. "Hello? We will cut Ray's balls off. Who is this? We will hang you for how you treated those kids. Who is this? You better shut the school down, bitch. You better shut it down or your entire fucking family's going to die." There were many other calls of a similar nature. To protect her family and herself, Virginia shut down the preschool on January 13th, 1984, after 27 years of service. Weeks later, Judy Johnson called Jane Hoag to tell her that Mitchell was abused in a car wash, which included being put inside the trunk of the car. She also reported that two men named Kurt and James, who worked for an organization called Nautilus, abused Mitchell. She would claim that he was always videotaped during these incidents of abuse. Judy kept coming up with more and more locations where Mitchell was allegedly abused, and the figures of these scenarios kept popping up on a regular basis as well, more and more people that she hadn't reported to Hoag previously. A man named Bob Curry was among the most vocal of the parents who were not only convinced the McMartins were guilty, but were also convinced that they were part of a satanic cult. He said at one of their gatherings, "That is the manner by which Satanists work. They disguise their personalities. They hush you into a condition of complacency, and afterward they move in for the kill. Petting, oral sex, assault, and homosexuality are the first steps. Then you get into things like torture. You know, there's nothing similar to making a dog or cat screech. You need to cause torment, unbearable agony. Yet you need to keep the casualty alive while you're making it happen. The objective isn't to kill them. The intention is to break their will. It gives you power. You can feel power, and this is a crime of power. Satanic love is the feeling of power." The McMartin case began to receive coverage in the media. This is a monologue delivered in a news broadcast. For a situation which has been depicted as one of the most peculiar and stunning ever to include small kids, the head prosecutor has a group of 6 exploring the claims of in excess of 60 small kids that they were physically attacked, shot, and threatened into quiet while under the watchful eye of the renowned preschool in Manhattan Beach. Journalist Wayne Satz has held up this story for over 3 weeks and is being informed that the report could imperil the continuous examination. In any case, he is currently ready to present to you this phenomenal story. It began here in Manhattan Beach, seeming to be an isolated incident. One mother saw that her young child was having bad dreams and trouble sitting down, with redness on his base. Specialists would later reason that her 2-year-old child had been sodomized. That was the previous summer. In the months since, The quantity of potential casualties has duplicated, no doubt. Specialists currently accept that something like 60 little youngsters were deceived and that a definitive number could be much greater. He mentioned the letter that was sent out by the police to the parents. The guardians didn't know then, at that point, that their kids had purportedly been threatened into remaining silent. He mentioned Key McFarland and said she was, quote, the broadly perceived master used by the prosecutor to, quote, open the insider facts that were supposedly suppressed by the children. He reported that, according to McFarland, numerous children were taken from the McMartin school to other locations where they were sexually abused as part of a scheme to produce child pornography. He also claimed that the children were threatened into silence by key figures like Ray Buckey. Satz had other conclusions. The way things are currently, nobody associated with the McMartin preschool has been accused of any wrongdoing. What we are revealing here is essentially that an enormous number of youngsters have, in discrete meetings, made exceptional charges, which thus have prompted one capture, a few claims, an admonition to guardians from nearby police, and, half a month from now, a full-scale jury investigation. It wasn't long before this piece led to a media frenzy. The mass panic spread throughout the greater Los Angeles area and, eventually, across the nation. People shouted insults at the Buckey house as they drove by. News vans were parked outside on the street in hopes that a member of the family would make a statement. Key McFarland was interviewed by Satz on television. Satz: how is it that it could be that children would maintain mysteries of this nature for so long? McFarland: kids are educated to trust and submit to grown-ups, particularly extremely little youngsters, to accept everything grown-ups say to them, particularly dangers. And children will go to great lengths to protect themselves and to protect their parents. I don't feel that the profundity of fear put into a youngster ought to be undervalued. In my 13 years of working in this field, I've never seen a circumstance that contrasts with this one. Satz: how could a youngster open up and let you know something when the person wouldn't tell their own folks? McFarland: frequently it's not the kids who tell me. My mannequins tell me. The program cut to a shot of one of McFarland's naked child dolls. The Buckey and McFarland families were watching the broadcast. Ray began to cry, fearing he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Judy Johnson documented in her journal an interview she conducted with Mitchell as he slept, and she imbibed multiple cocktails. It went like this. The three ladies are witches. The man jabbed him. Peggy, Babs, and Betty are spruced up as witches. As well, Peggy gave Mitchell a purification. Staples were placed in Mitchell's ears, areolas, and tongue. Babs put scissors in his eyes. She slashed up creatures. Something dreadful would come in the window. Beam made little babies cry. Mitchell describes having fellowship in a congregation, a request like the Lord's Prayer. A goat moved increasingly elevated. Ray jabbed Peggy at the special raised area. Loads of candles. Ray pricked his sharp finger. It drained. Ray put it on the goat's anus. Old Grandma played the piano. A real baby. The head was chopped off. Brains were burned. Peggy killed the baby. Mitchell had to drink the baby's blood. On the altar, Mitchell's bottom was bleeding. Ray put a Tampax up his bottom to stop the bleeding. Then he took it out. The next day, Judy met with Detective Hogue to reveal these findings to her. Hogue passed the information on to the district attorney specialist, Tim Tyson, who was assigned to the case, who contacted Judy. He transcribed what Judy told him. Mitchell feels that he left LAX in an airplane and flew to Palm Springs area. At the armory, there were some people wearing armory uniforms. The goat man was there, a ritual type of atmosphere. At the church, Peggy drilled a child under the armpits. Atmosphere was that of magic chants. Ray flew in the air. A news report aired at this time in regards to the McMartin case. Police strike 11 areas in relationship with the McMartin preschool case. The urban communities of Manhattan Beach, Torrance, Rowland Heights, Newport Beach, and Riverside County, an assortment of homes and private businesses. Judy Johnson gave a testimony before a judge, but was largely discounted. Ultimately, many of her claims were seen as potentially dubious, not to mention bizarre, and she came across as mentally unstable. The police went to the Bucky home and arrested Ray and Peggy. Babette Spittler, another staff member, was taken into custody. Another employee, Betty Rador, was arrested. Former McMartin employee, Mary Ann Jackson, was taken into custody. Virginia McMartin was advised by her lawyer to turn herself in, which she did. All the suspects in the case would become known as the McMartin Seven. At their first hearing, some of the parents were present and shouted threats at them. They were soon cleared from the room. Deputy District Attorney John Madusinka made an opening statement. Your Honor, we have a sum of 109 counts of felony child abuse, including more than 100 understudies north of a 10-year period. John recommended to the judge that they set the bail at a very high figure. The judge set a bail hearing for the following day. District Attorney Robert Philbosian gave this statement to the press outside the court building. We are claiming that roughly 100 youngsters were physically attacked at the school throughout the course of recent years. To get their silence, these individuals let the youngsters know that their, quote, folks would be hurt. And to back up those dangers, little creatures were really butchered in the kids' presence. These are considered lustful and salacious actions forced upon children younger than 14. That's the penal code definition. We're talking about assault, homosexuality, oral sexual intercourse, and fondling. The next day, the McMartin Seven received their bail figures. Ray Bucky with 75 charges, $1 million. Peggy Bucky, $350,000. The bails of the other women ranged from $50,000 to $100,000. Virginia requested that she be spared detention due to her failing health, but the judge denied this request. They would be remanded to jail pending their arraignments on April 6th. Before the April 6th arraignment, 43 more children were evaluated as CII and were all assumed to be victims of the McMartin Seven. Prosecutor Lael Rubin made the following statement. Your Honor, our most recent reports from CII show that the children were sedated into unconsciousness by the use of a pink fluid pill. I am recommending that none of these respondents be liberated on bail, for it would put the children through extraordinary mental injury upon their realization that their previous educators were back in our community. The judge denied bail to all the defendants except Virginia and Marianne. The McMartin school was vandalized and burned to the ground by vigilantes. On the sign out front, someone wrote, "Just the beginning." At a meeting of the parents, one woman named Carol Burkhart, while sure her child had been abused, conceded that many of the details of the allegations were over the top and fanciful. In some cases, the events didn't even sound logistically correct. As she put it, "It isn't so much that I think my child is lying. I most certainly think he was attacked. However, a portion of the things he says are unimaginable to the point that I can't get a handle on it. He said he was attacked at Harry's Market. We go there every day. My God, he said he flew on a plane. He said he went far away to a farm. How? How did that happen? What airport did he fly out of? And how did he do that and make it back to the preschool before noon? And again, nobody, not one of us, ever saw anything." She was told to trust her child and thereby believe everything he says. Babette Spittler's children became wards of the state when they were suspected of having been abused by the McMartin Seven, even though no such allegations had been made. They were taken to visit Babette. She commented on this occasion, "My child continued inquiring as to why he was being taken. I was in prison going crazy, and when Don, my husband, dropped by, I was unable to contact him. We just stayed there looking at each other through a plate of glass. I advised him to separate from me so he could keep custody of the children. The court decided that Don was also an unfit parent because of the assumption that he knew about and facilitated the abuse that was going on. Their kids were denied any amount of access to their parents, not even a phone call." In the meantime, there was a great deal of turmoil within the marriages of McMartin's student parents. One spouse would accuse the other of somehow making it possible for their child to be abused. Detective Hogue met Betsy Warren, a girl who had been a student at the Manhattan Ranch School and an alleged victim of the abuse. Hogue showed her a picture of the school and asked her if she had been there. Betsy said she had been there before and that Ray Bucky took her. When asked by Hogue what transpired at the ranch, Betsy said that Ray killed animals at the site. Mitchell Johnson was found to have been molested again, but with the McMartins in jail and their preschool out of business and burned to the ground, they could not be blamed. This time around, Mitchell reported that his father penetrated his anus with an object. He reported this to a doctor. Hogue recommended to Judy that she no longer allow Mitchell to see his father. Without notifying Hogue, Judy continued to send him to his father, Brad, for visitations. At the onset of July 1984, Detective Hogue had the premise of her theory about the suspects worked out. The proprietors and operators of the Manhattan Ranch preschool were part of a conspiracy involving the suspects in the McMartin case. Hogue's theory was that these people, under the guise of child caretakers, ran a child pornography ring, with a man named Michael Ruby as their enforcer. Ruby was considered to be a leading figure in this scenario. He ensured the children followed all rules and disciplined them in very harsh ways when they didn't. His crimes were hidden by the women who ran both facilities. Hogue was convinced of this and sought the evidence to prove it. Judy Johnson was convinced that Mitchell was abused by those people, and Hogue believed every word she ever heard from Judy's mouth. Critical thinking be damned. Detective Patty Picker met with children who also reported being sexually abused while playing so-called naked games. They also told her animals were sacrificed. One girl said Peggy told her she was a witch who had paranormal abilities. She also recalled being threatened with violence and death were she to tell anyone about what transpired at the ranch. Soon word spread about an alleged child swapping ring, a collaboration between the McMartin staff and the staff of the Manhattan Ranch. Investigators searched all the facilities where the victims were allegedly abused. They found no incriminating materials. The Manhattan Ranch preschool received bomb threats in its voicemail. The facility was searched top to bottom. Even the proprietor, Kathy Lord's vehicle, was torn apart. After a 3-hour search, no incriminating materials were uncovered. The police had yet to find all the child pornography that was supposedly being covered up. Michael Ruby was a worker in one of the preschools being investigated. He was placed under arrest for his suspected role in the abuse scandal. During questioning, Ruby was notified he was accused by a little girl of taking pornographic photos of and sexually abusing her. He denied having done these things. He was asked by Detective Hogue if he knew Raymond Bucky. He said he did not. He also denied knowing the staff of the McMartin school. He was put in a holding cell and later transferred to jail. He was so terrified he wept. At his plea hearing, Michael Ruby pled not guilty. He was informed that with a plea deal, he would be released from the juvenile corrections system by the age of 25. Were he to be convicted in the event that the case go to trial, he faced the possibility of life in prison, where his survival could not be assured. He was willing to take that risk because he could not bear the thought of being identified as the man who committed the offenses of which he had been accused. Michael's church raised money so he could make bail, and he was released. A preschool called the Children's Path was now accused of abusing children. The proprietor, Jan Shane, closed it down after receiving threatening voicemails. A large group of the children's parents formed a coalition they called Parents Against Child Abuse, or PACA. They held a press conference. One woman held up a sign that read, "Believe the Children." They announced that they would award $10,000 to anyone who could provide photographic proof of the abuse that was alleged to have occurred. It was getting to the point that any business that provided child care in Manhattan Beach was presumed to be involved in satanic rituals and the production of child pornography. A witch hunt was underway. A report emerged that some students of a preschool called the Learning Game alleged that they were sexually abused. They claimed they were brought to the McMartin school to be molested. Another claim was that they were, quote, clinically, unquote, proven to have been assaulted. Police searched the premises of the Learning Game, tearing the place apart in the process and leaving it a shambles. They seized some of the business's records. No incriminating materials were found. In a news interview, proprietor Helen Stearns stated that she did not send children to the McMartin school. After all, McMartin was their competition. Nevertheless, based on allegations that a 3-year-old was abused, Stearns' license was suspended pending an investigation. The Learning Game shut its doors, temporarily at first. Jan Shane decided not to reopen the Children's Path due to vandalism and threats of violence. A man named Chuck Elliott attended a meeting for Children's Path parents. He didn't believe his own son was abused, but he wanted to hear what the other parents would say. Parents talked about picketing Children's Path, while others openly considered bludgeoning the staff with baseball bats. Investigators uncovered a pair of rabbit's ears in one suspect's home. They concluded that this was conclusive and irrefutable evidence that an animal sacrifice had been made in the presence of children at a satanic ritual. The suspect insisted it was a souvenir of a hunting expedition. February 12, 1985. Billy Sampson, 10 years old, finished 9 days of testimony in a preliminary hearing. 8 of those 9 days consisted of cross-examination. As Billy gave a graphic account of sexual abuse, Ray Buckey wrote down some notes that went as follows. Never saw Billy before in my life before I saw him on the CII videotape. Honestly, that I can remember. I went to the open house each year at the school, mostly because I had to, and the remaining reason was to eat the cookies. Billy could have seen me then, but I wouldn't have stuck out like a sore thumb because the school was packed with older brothers and fathers. Terry Stafford, the mother, I knew by name and sight because she stopped by the school occasionally when I was there, and I think as a carpool mother. She was very involved in the women's group in Manhattan Beach. He went on to make the point that it would have been impossible to take the children elsewhere, given the limited amount of time to do so and the impossibility of nobody else noticing. More from Ray's notes. Billy's is the case's premier pathological liar. Smart enough not to be cornered in a lie or admit an obvious lie, he just lied his way out again. Probably the child with the most testimony and growth of the stories. Reason for lying? This child looks like he wouldn't be accepted by his peers. Red hair, freckles, and fat. What I see is a child getting more attention than he could ever imagine. And love, pity, attention, negative in a way, from his family. An inadvertent free rein and reinforcement from his parents to make up a flat-out lie on the stand. I don't think he'll testify at the trial because his stories are too easily chopped down to their pure essence, stories beyond possibility. I was not at the school around 79 when he attended. He was certainly correct on that last point. Billy Sampson last attended the McMartin school during the 1978-79 year. That was 3 years before Ray had begun working there. Taking this into account, Billy stated that Ray still snuck on and off the campus during that time and that he participated in group sex along with the female defendants. Billy's testimony got more and more bizarre as time went on. He described being taken to a church where adults were wearing black robes and masks and danced and moaned. He claimed that this took place at the St. Cross Episcopal Church. During the time Billy alleged he was abused, neither he nor his brother Jeremy presented with any physical or emotional symptoms of abuse. He said Ray Buckey went to the altar, whereupon he killed rabbits, turtles, and birds, and told the children he would kill their parents if they told. He also said Ray made him drink a rabbit's blood. Bill said that on a trip to a farm, Ray chopped a pony to pieces. Billy denied anything happened to him before his mother took him to CII. During his evaluation there, he was considered to be one of the most quote-unquote pessimistic cases they had ever come by, which supposedly included a rectal examination. Investigators examined the site at St. Cross Episcopal Church, where the animal sacrifice rituals were said to have occurred. They found no evidence that such rites had happened there. A group of parents dug up the yard around the McMartin school looking for bones. One of them unearthed a turtle shell and declared it as evidence. Other shells were found along with animal bones. Police determined that these animals did not function as evidence in the case because they more than likely died of natural causes. As 34-year-old Dave Robinson walked out to his driveway prepared to depart for work, he found himself surrounded by cops. They drew their guns and said, "Are you David Robinson?" Before he could answer, they told him to put his hands up. Some of the officers pressed him against his vehicle, while others ran upstairs toward the door of his loft. David's wife Patricia was still asleep, as was their daughter Jessica. Police burst through the door, waking both her and Jessica. Patricia picked Jessica up and held her close to her bosom. One of the cops waved a waiver in the air. Patricia was told by him to hand Jessica over to him and recede into the background. She was told the baby was to become a ward of the state. When she asked why, she was told she was considered an unfit parent. She was also told about allegations that she assaulted Jessica. Patricia wept as one of the cops pulled Jessica from her arms. Another team of police stormed the unit of Malcolm and Gretchen Campbell. Gretchen is Patricia's sister. The leader of the team announced to Malcolm that they had a court order. A female criminal investigator said to Gretchen, "Do you have faith in Satan?" Gretchen was baffled. She asked the woman what she was talking about. She was asked if she was a practicing Satanist. Meanwhile, Patricia and Gretchen's mother, Mary Lou Briesler, heard a hard rapping on her door. The party on the other side of the door announced they were the police and that they had an arrest warrant. Her 14-year-old daughter, Penny, came out of her room curious to know what the ruckus was all about. Mary Lou told her to go back to her room and close the door. When Mary Lou opened the door, a group of cops stormed past her, leaving the warrant to fall to her feet. Fran Grammer was Mary Lou's sister. She did some of her own child care as a babysitter. She would look after McMartin children who required care after 4 p.m., the time that McMartin closed. The police stormed her home and went through every drawer, tearing things out and throwing them about, turned things over, made a general mess of the place. Once they were done, it looked like her home had been struck by a windstorm. The Brieslers were now accused of assault, homosexuality, oral copulation, child pornography, and rape. Mary Lou was accused of drinking blood from a chalice, lighting black candles, and wearing a red demon outfit. She was also alleged to have killed and buried animals on her lawn. One child reported seeing relatives of Penny molesting her. Speaking of Penny, she was told by a female cop to get dressed because she was being placed in state care. Penny began to cry. She fled to Mary Lou and begged her to stop them from taking her away. Mary Lou advised her to go with the cops, but promised that everything would be okay in time. At David and Patricia's, the cops seized everything they considered to be potential evidence of satanic rituals, including videotapes of horror movies like The Thing and The Dead Zone, Halloween costumes, and makeup. Mercifully, at the end of a 7-hour search, the police handed Jessica back to Patricia. They found nothing incriminating in their personal effects. Penny Briesler was interviewed for hours so that the police might glean some kind of incriminating revelations about her family. She told them nothing. Penny was forced through a medical examination to determine if she had been sexually abused. Her vagina was probed by cold metal instruments against her will. The results: no indicators of sexual assault. Penny was given a McDonald's Happy Meal and sent to live in a children's home. She was not to have any contact with her parents, not even over the phone. Weeks later, Penny was in a foster home. She took a butcher knife and cut her wrists as a suicide attempt. She decided that if she could not even so much as see her family, life would not be worth living. The cuts were not deep enough to kill her. Judy Johnson had a nervous breakdown and threatened to shoot herself before police intervened and checked her into a psychiatric care facility, all on Good Friday. On April 18th, she was discharged. Her diagnosis: intense neurotic schizophrenia. She became convinced that evil spirits had infiltrated her home. She hired an exorcist to purge them. July 1985. Michael Ruby's trial was imminent. Media coverage up to this point had been biased in favor of the parents and their children. There was one exception, however. This is a quote from an article published by the Daily Breeze. Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. Manhattan Beach, 1985. The scandalous Salem witch hunt of the 17th century is reoccurring, yet this time here in Manhattan Beach. Specialists are acting just on the allegations of kids provoked by grown-ups. Assuming you figured this would never occur in America, particularly today, reconsider. It could happen to you. One day at 7:30 a.m., a firefighter was driving home after a shift. His wife and children were asleep. Outside of their home stood Detective Jane Hogue with a court order. She was flanked by plainclothes task force members. When the wife answered the door after the incessant banging woke her up, the court order was pushed into her face by Hogue. Hogue informed her she was taking the children to the station for questioning. The mother told her they couldn't take her children. Hogue commanded her to wake them up and get them dressed. The children were terrified. When the mother asked Hogue what they wanted to ask the children about, Hogue stonewalled her and left. When the mother read the court order, she discovered she was accused of sexually abusing children she watched as a babysitting service in her home. Their parents reported her to the police for these allegations. There was no supporting material in the warrant calling for the seizure of her own 2 children. Her husband returned home to find the house ransacked. Burglars wouldn't have made such a mess. They didn't find any incriminating materials, as usual. The parents were informed that their children were being taken to a hospital to be examined for signs of sexual abuse. 8 hours after the children's genitals were probed in hospital, it was determined that they were not sexually assaulted, and they were returned to their parents. While Ray Buckey was in jail, he wrote down some more of his thoughts on the case. From the start, asked Jane Hogue for what reason she sought after the Johnson mother's allegations so resolutely from a nonverbal 2-year-old. How was it that I could sodomize a 2-year-old and not do more damage? Why was the older sibling who he showered with was let off with such ease? For what reason would I say I wasn't defied, similar to the father? Wasn't the justification for arresting me, since you knew Mitchell as a 2-year-old was not a dependable observer, so you maintain that something should tell the guardians a letter to convince more cooperation? If you accept I attacked Mitchell, do you likewise accept what his dad did and different stories his mom has said consequently? Why not? Why didn't you go to the school's owners for cooperation? Calling parents? Didn't you understand that a parent cannot see their child clearly when it comes to abuse? Doing it that way led to tremendous fear. Looking now at the Johnson mother, her mental stability is in question, and being the beginning of the case, a kid Hogue admitted on the stand couldn't qualify as a witness. Again, for what reason was my guilt so easily assumed? Exclusively in light of the fact that I was a male educator at a preschool, going by a youngster who wouldn't qualify in a conviction, and a letter shipped off to more than 200 families. Once more, just after my arrest. Why did they denounce me in that letter, knowing that far and wide it would create a very close community joined together in fear? Sure, the kids' well-being is the highest level in a just system. Kids are weak and need to be protected. Anything justifies their security. But looking back, didn't the steps taken in the investigation lead to a small-town epidemic of misguided paranoia? Mid-October rolled around, and Sheriff Block announced that the Sexual Exploitation of Children Task Force was to be disbanded on January 1st, 1986, due to the fact that it used up all its allocated financial resources. They interviewed 740 children and 400 adults. Over 100 of the children were deemed to have exhibited, quote, actual side effects, unquote, of sexual abuse. Join me next week for Volume 2 of The Satanic Panic, Part 1, The McMartin Case. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.